This is Devin Foley, CEO of Charlemagne Institute, and welcome to another episode of First Tuesday Conservatives Countdown to the Election. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Bob Kroll, who is the president of the Police Officers Federation of Minneapolis. He has been a police officer since 1989 and is probably best known around the country for being the man who had Black Lives Matter and others doing a protest right outside of his house in Hugo, and then calling for the burning down of Hugo if folks weren't amenable to the ideas of Black Lives Matter in that situation. So without further ado, love to be able to introduce you, Bob Kroll. Thank you so much for joining us, and tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, you've been a police officer since 1989. What led you to choose that path?
Thanks for having me, Devin. I guess you could just say it was a calling. It's something that I wanted to do my entire life. I knew growing up, I had always wanted to become a police officer, always in a large city. I grew up in St. Paul. Would have loved to have been there, but Minneapolis offered a job first. I was actually in the hiring process for both Minneapolis and St. Paul. And prior to that, I went into the Army Reserve Military Police. So I did 21 years in the Army Reserve, and I'm coming up on 32 with Minneapolis Police Department right now.
Well done. I would definitely say it's in your blood then.
Yeah.
You've seen a lot out there. When it comes to what everybody's wanting to know, of course, is your take on the riots and everything that's been happening. I mean, when I rewatched the video today of Black Lives Matter protesting in front of your house with profanity, laced tirades, and very anti-white racism, all of that, I can only imagine how you must have felt at that time. Give us a sense of what was just going through your thoughts. I mean, did you ever expect such a development to happen where you were threatened in your own home?
No, and I think we got to back up a little bit to the actual riots, and I think it all began there. If you think back to what was said, there was the short video clip that was taken from a person's cell phone in the George Floyd incident, and we had the governor, the mayor, the attorney general, the director, the commissioner of public safety, and the police chief all come out and call those four officers murderers. And if you ask me, incite the violence that ensued for the following week. Our federation came out and said, we got to wait and see more facts. Let's just everybody remain calm. Justice will be served. We've got a process that's the criminal justice system, the best one in the world in this country. And we called for calm and quiet, and that wasn't good enough. And for whatever reason, the left selected a scapegoat, and that was me, and it was our Police Officers Federation. And things spiraled over the summer to the point that we had a large-scale protest in front of our house, and it was, they remained in the street for the most part, but the things that were said, the vulgarity, the disruption of the neighborhood, it was certainly, in my opinion, at a minimum, disorderly conduct by those involved. And of all things, one of the key players was Representative John Thompson, who was running for State House on the east side of St. Paul, ironically where I grew up. But and he will probably get elected. They refused to condemn his actions. They being the Democratic Party, party leadership, the governor, the Speaker of the House. None of them condemned his actions. In fact, Speaker Hortman said she was afraid to condemn his actions because they protested her place before. Well, what kind of leader is that? So that's what led here. And was I shocked? Of course. I mean, when you consider the union's involvement in the Floyd matter, it's very minimal. We have our officers entered into a legal defense fund that most agencies in the state of Minnesota do. It's through the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. Through our member dues, they're enrolled in that, and that's who the defense attorneys are for these officers. And that's pretty much the end of the union's involvement. I haven't been out there being a vocal advocate. My position has not changed, and that's the same position as my board and our membership. It's let the criminal justice process take its place and, reserve judgment. So it looked terrific. We've came out and said that, but again, we have the best criminal justice system in the world, and let it take place. But the cause for riots, and when you consider the damage done in the city, I think if calmer heads in leadership would have prevailed and just said, let this process work, it may have had a minimizing effect on the damage that was caused in the city of Minneapolis, to a city I love. I mean, I spent 32 years working there, and mainly Lake Street area too. And Lake Street was destroyed from one end of the city to the next. And that's an area that I was a patrol officer and a patrol supervisor. It really, it really hurt to see what happened to that neighborhood.
Oh, the devastation is incredible. I know there are plenty of people who are not driving through Minneapolis these days, but I drove, as you said, all the way from uptown all the way down Lake, and it's literally miles and miles of ruined, buildings
Right.
that have been sacked and looted and burned, and broken windows and piles of rubble. The devastation is incredible. So when you look at, the unfolding of events, that video of George Floyd, of course, and Derek Chauvin, that thing went viral, and next thing you knew is everybody saying, well, the police killed him, and there wasn't any call to slow things down and to let the justice, process play out. And we've seen this over and over, whether it be down in Ferguson or elsewhere, where an individual, there's a narrative that comes out, grabs the attention, people come out rioting, violence, things of this nature, and then the truth comes out later that it's a very different story. And I know from the autopsy records, it would appear that George Floyd, and as well as the video that was released and then the transcript of the arrest, it's very clear that George Floyd was suffering from an inability to breathe prior to
Right.
the officers, arresting, and then especially prior to Derek Chauvin doing the knee on the back. And so, how do we get people to actually slow things down? Is it simply a lack of leadership? Is it leadership that doesn't want to critique, part of their voter base, their base? What do you see out there as far as this impatience and lack of interest in real justice playing out?
I think that's the key, Devin. You hit it. It's the lack of leadership in the situation, and it started with the chief. I mean, that night, and prior to this, we've always had a good working relationship. We were down there together after this critical incident occurred, and he decided at 2 a.m. he was going to call the FBI in, and the next day you've got the mayor, and the governor calling these guys murderers, and it's like, that's not leadership. You're inciting the violence. Just say that, there's a lot of work to be done. The officers involved were cooperating with the process, but you've got to get all of the footage. You've got to let the autopsy results come in and things like that. And they whether it was politically driven or what the motive was, in the end result was it led to mass destruction that really didn't have to occur. Sure, there quite possibly could have been some protest, some disruption, and maybe even riots on a smaller scale. But the way our leaders handled it was completely wrong. It incited and encouraged violence. And then when you move forward during the 5 days that followed, there was certainly opportunity to shut that down and not let it get to the scale that it did. And that starts with letting the officers, letting the leadership on the street trying to quell that riot do the job that they know they need to do, and give them the resources to do it. And that's mobilize the National Guard. And there's all types of things that happened that were errors, and they were errors when it comes to politics. And you saw Mayor Fry and you saw Governor Walz pointing the finger at one another on this, on who handled it worse, and you didn't ask for the Guard fast enough, and how many did you need, and things like that. But mutual aid and National Guard could have and should have been deployed a lot sooner. and more importantly, let the officers in the street do their job. They were told that they couldn't deliver less lethal munitions. They were told that they couldn't deliver CS gas, things like that. They had to hold off and wait. The rules of engagement were restricted upon them.
Well, and it seems that that culminated into the sacking of the third precinct. And, watching that take place, as well as conversations with a lot of other people, it seemed as if we had a collective realization that that was the leadership of the city let something happen that absolutely should not have happened. By allowing the third precinct to be sacked, it was, I would say, a will to power moment that these, the Antifa, BLM rioters showed that they're willing to go all the way, whereas city leadership step back and just let it happen. And the damage from that, you hear from people who are being threatened on the street, just normal residents in Minneapolis, and people that are threatening them or about to commit crime will say, well, call the police, come and get them.
Right. Right.
What has been what is the inside view of a police officer in Minneapolis when a precinct is sacked? And
well, I think in the motivation with the political leaders there was they thought it would be a symbolic victory and they would give it away and they would go home. And the reality is it was just the opposite. It empowered them to go ahead and do more destruction and, in essence, destroy Lake Street from one side to the other, one side to the other, to the city limits. And then other areas throughout the city leading into downtown. I don't know why they were so misguided in that, but for the average officer right now, particularly the third precinct officers, they certainly feel abandoned. They're working out of the convention center now. The station facilities are less than desirable. Every time they try to get and secure a new precinct to work out of, the mob comes out and intimidates the business that's going to sell it to them or rent it to them or lease it, and intimidates them from letting the department have it, not just with the police administration, but above that, the city council. They've had to deal through all this of the calling for the defunding. We've had officers leave in record numbers. There's many pending out. The department, when you take out those on personnel leaves, meaning pending retirement now, the department is the smallest that it's been in my career and years before I started. So the smallest I've ever seen it was 760. And when you pull all the people out that are on paper but not working any longer, we're down to 730 right now. So you've got mass people leaving. They don't feel supported by the politicians. They're going to other agencies. They're going to other agencies around the state. Small agencies are having 30 Minneapolis cops test to get on there. So good for other agencies. They're gaining some very experienced people, but bad for the city. And right now we've got a crisis because crime is, in addition, spiraling out of control. Everybody is focused on the death that occurred when officers were involved, but how about the 68 criminal murders that have happened this year? On the pace we're going, we'll be right up in the running for a record year of homicides. And let's be honest, these aren't police getting dispatched to someone doing something. These are just out and out cold-blooded murders. And fortunately for advanced EMS that we've got in the city, when you think of North Memorial and Hennepin County Medical Center, the death rate is not a lot higher because they're saving lives every night. We used to have, 2 or 3 shootings every 3 or 4 nights. Now we're getting 2 or 3 shootings per night. So the death toll would be a lot higher, but not for several factors. And one of them is the advanced EMS.
I've watched Chicago, watched Minneapolis now, and St. Paul and other places, New York. It just seems that it would be very difficult to be a police officer in this environment. You're asked to go out there, put yourself on the line to walk into a situation that could be quite explosive. I mean, even the George Floyd situation, you don't know what's happening. There are multiple people involved. Some people are, clearly maybe dealing with substance abuse and things of that nature, and things can spiral out of control very quickly. But it seems that the leadership of these major cities do not have the backs of their police officers. And do you see that as the main driver for all of these retirements?
I do.
Okay.
I do. You know, you're asking the officers to do too much. You want them to be a social worker. You know, you got to deal with people in mental health crisis. You got to deal with people under the influence, people that are combative. And now our policies have changed this summer too, due to this, that are much more restrictive and time consuming. Use of force now is if you put your hands on someone and put handcuffs on them, or if you draw your firearm. These are all reportable force policy changes now. That now you've got to call a supervisor out and interview the people involved and do reports. So they've got them so wrapped in red tape right now that it makes it difficult for the officer to do their job. Plus, of course, there's the Monday morning quarterbacking, and with the message that they're sending to the bad people out there, it's, hey, listen, go ahead, fight, run, don't comply, take control over the situation. And officers are taught in their training to quickly gain control over the situation for everyone's safety involved, not just the officer, the people they're dealing with, and the bystanders. Quickly gain control. And now this de-escalation, they want to talk everybody back and wait. And the end result is people are getting hurt as a result of it. People say, what can citizens do? And it's like, comply with what the officer is requesting. There's plenty of avenues to complain later on, and do that rather than escalate the situation. If you feel you've been mistreated, everything's going to be on body camera, but you're not going to get hurt if you offer compliance.
No, and that's an important message as well. And the disaster that's taking place in Minneapolis. I follow, a number of Twitter feeds that are following the police scanners, and I mean, on a daily basis, it seems to be at least a couple carjackings, multiple assaults, plus, thievery taking place, where a group of individuals will jump out of a car and attack a young lady walking down the street, take her purse, her phone, other things. And then, of course, the shootings, and then the homicides that are taking place as well. I mean, it seems that unless you actually have strong leadership at the top, how do you get control of this situation? Because a lot of people are getting hurt and having their lives upended as a result of this.
Right, and you don't, and you've got to have, that's the key. It's strong leadership, and leadership starts at the top. And you've got to give your officers the benefit of the doubt, let them do their job. And again, for people out on the street, just go with what you're requested to do. If everybody goes with the flow, and if you feel you've been mistreated, there's a dozen different ways to complain against officers that'll be fully investigated.
And then when it comes to, what's happening on the street, there are a lot of folks that would say, oh, we're being, different minority communities are being mistreated, they're being harmed, that the police are unfair, or violent, or racist, or prejudiced, all of these things. And naturally, of course, if you've got 730 individuals out there, you're going to have some bad apples. But what would you overall say to that narrative that the police are, violent racists trying to hold down minority communities?
It's completely untrue. And look no further than our Federation board. We've got there's 9 of us on the Federation board. One's just going through retirement, so we had 10. But we've got the most diverse board in the history of the MPD. Rich Walker is a Black officer that works in the gang unit. He's been a director on the board for a number of years. If you don't believe me, take it from him. Racism is not tolerated. No one wants to work with a racist, and it's completely a false narrative out there that these are a bunch of thugs and that it is a false narrative. And when you drill down to it, I encourage people to ask specifics. Again, we got a very diverse board. We've got a very diverse workforce, and we're out trying to recruit and retain diversity. And the Federation's always been a party to that. We've always been had a seat at the table and has encouraged it. And they want to paint the false narrative that we stand in the way in that. And we don't do the hiring. The city of Minneapolis does the hiring, of course. We, in fact, used to sit on hiring panels for many years, and they cut the Federation out years ago. But that is simply a false narrative. And I encourage people to say, give me specifics, what you're talking about, because if that occurs, in all likelihood, it's going to be caught on camera, and those officers are going to be dealt with.
And when we look at, some of the outcry is that certain minority groups seem to be arrested in larger numbers, and that is used as proof of, the police misconduct and targeting. On the flip side, though, I look at it, and I'm a guy that believes family is the foundation of society. And, you look at some of the numbers, you've got, upwards of 87% out of wedlock birth rates for, African Americans in Minneapolis. And you've got the subsequent problems of education and other things. When you were out there as a police officer, and you still are, what do you see as far as family formation, passing on of beliefs, things like that, for people that are getting themselves sideways with the law?
Well,
Are
I
there
think
commonalities that you see?
of course, and I think you touched on it. It's fatherless homes. You start right there. Single parent homes, no father in the picture, disrespect in school, disrespect to neighbors. It starts there. And responsible people raising a family raise their children to respect authority, not confront authority. So again, it certainly starts there. When you talk about, numbers are disproportionate, I'm a big fan of keeping stats. But any fair analysis needs to start with, let's have what that unbiased victim or that unbiased witness, the 911 caller, is reporting as a suspect description. And that's got to be your baseline. And until you're willing to get your arms around that and record, this is what the suspect description is in any of these cases, you name it, you got to be careful on who's getting stopped where and for what. Because if you've got a certain crime being committed by a certain description, the officers are going to be looking for that description. And sadly, right now, most of our homicides, and certainly the vast majority of our shootings, that they're dealing with black on black crime. And another false narrative that is painted out there is that black communities don't want officers in there, and that's completely false. Also, our officers patrolling a lot of the black areas are very well appreciated by officers. And when you find your people that are calling for the defunding, this is council members that have their own private security guarding them. And your average resident in Minneapolis that lives and works in those high crime areas, they appreciate the police protection, and they often communicate that with their officers. That's one thing, is the true citizens in Minneapolis have been very supportive of our officers during these times, because they know they're needed. And that's another way that I dispute this racist stuff, is why would officers go out there? Because by and large, when you're working these areas, you're in minority communities, and the bottom line is you're helping them, whether you're responding to them as a shooting victim or a theft victim or whatever, you're there helping. So I really dispute this false narrative about the racist behavior of Minneapolis police also, or take it beyond Minneapolis, all the major cities that we see.
Yeah, and you can make that argument. Why would a police officer want to help if he's a racist? Be able to help a minority community or a minority victim or any of these things. Most people obviously are not police officers. When you talk about in the community, that the people in the community, what is that like from the police officers' view of things? How embedded into a community are you? How well or poorly do you know the different businesses and then the troublemakers and everybody else? What does it look like for a police officer?
I think a lot of it depends on the tenure and how long you've been working in the same area. You know, in larger departments, there's one thing that if you do move around, it keeps you kind of fresh in your career. You may need a break from here or there, but I still felt it when I went down Lake Street and saw the destruction, because I worked Lake Street as a patrolman from 89 to 94, and then I was in the vice squad undercover in the same area, and then I was back there as a patrol supervisor for several years around 2000. And you develop attachments, and they're still there. Thurston's Jewelers was torched and vandalized, and I became, just from working there, became friends with the owner. And Shots Line Saddle Shop, just a few blocks up from there. These people had, their businesses in essence shut down for a period, and you develop strong community ties with not just the business owners but the people that live there, and you also get to know the bad guys and the good guys and things like that too. Your good officers, that's what they do. They're on patrol. They get to know their people, and that includes, even sometimes you get to know the bad guys there, and there's a mutual respect, and that's what other people don't understand either.
Can you elaborate on that as far as mutual respect between the police and the bad guys?
Back in the day, we knew who was dealing crack. When I started, I worked that area during the crack wave hitting Minneapolis, and we knew who the dealers were. And you knew who the informants were, and you develop a rapport, and you've got to work with these people out there, and you'd know them by name, they'd know you by name, but there was somewhat of a mutual respect. And I remember people going by that didn't know what was going on and think that, hey, you're unfairly targeting. Well, no, I'm stopping the guy because I know he's one of the dealers in the area, type of thing.
Yeah, and that's something, it just seems to me that we live in a world that's obviously very quick to judge. We also live in a world that, we've been trained by Law and Order episodes to think that 45 minutes is all that it takes to, find a crime, process the crime, get everything back from the crime bureau and make the arrest. And it's just not like that at all. But I mean, when you're going into a situation, you have no idea what you could be going into. Is that generally how it is? And if that's the case, I mean, what's going through your mind at a time like that? Or when you look at the George Floyd situation and you read that transcript, I mean, it seemed that there was confusion. The police officers were trying to figure out what was going on, why he was acting the way he was, control the situation, multiple other people that who knows what would happen. But what is the perspective like, and what is it like for a police officer to be in that moment?
Right, and you don't know, everything is the unknown when you go into a call, whether it's someone's house or it's a business. Things aren't always what they appear. This is something that I wish our department would do a better job with, and it's called the Citizens Academies and ride-alongs. Why we are not using that to develop better community relations and have people experience ride-alongs that, hey, what are you gonna encounter when you go into this place? And oftentimes it's not what you expect. But I think we could do a lot better job if we had people go through and attend Citizens Academies to see and go through shoot, don't shoot scenarios and do police ride-alongs and develop a better understanding of what goes through the officer's mind. And after your training, and then after training, your experience, you develop a survival instinct. And that's something that your good officers have, or all officers should have for that matter. But yes, you're thinking beyond what your average person being along a ride along would be thinking of. You're watching people's hands. You always want to see their hands. You need you need compliance immediately. And if you're not, you're going to grab people's hands out of their pockets. And people don't realize what they do, why the officers are doing those type of things. But I think it goes a long way after the encounter to explain to the person that, hey, this is why I grabbed your hands. Weapons are carried in waistlines and belts, pockets, those types of things. And even when an explanation goes a long way, when you stop a vehicle for something that was, maybe described and used in a crime, and you stop people and you think they may be targeted because of their race, put them in the back of your car, check it out, let them read the remarks in the call on what you were dispatched to, that, hey, I was dispatched to a vehicle meeting the description, this is what it is, here's what it is, here's where I stopped you. a good explanation like that goes a long way, because explaining to people that you're dealing with in the community why you did what you did.
And so this completely surprises me, but Minneapolis Police Department does not do ride-alongs and does not have a Citizens Academy.
We do ride-alongs, but I think it's really something that we should promote and have and encourage people to do. Too often the ride-alongs are people that know the officer, want to ride and things like that. But if we would promote it more to get more people to see what we actually deal with, and then the Citizens Academies, we used to do them quite frequently, and now they've really dropped off. We're not doing them like we should.
And what did a Citizens Academy look like? Was that a Saturday that you 9 to 4 or something like that?
They do them on. They used to be like a Wednesday night from 6 to 9, and it would go on for 8 weeks or so. And
Okay.
they various aspects of things. Whether it would be a canine demo, shooting, shoot, don't shoot scenarios. SWAT comes in and talks, bomb squad, things like that. They give a well-rounded view of what the department is like.
Got it. And I've seen some of those.
Hands-on things.
Yeah, especially the shoot, don't shoot situation, where I've seen some members of the media who are hostile to police actually taking part in those and doing a 180. I mean,
it's eye-opening, yeah.
Yeah, you don't, for a normal person, we're not wandering around thinking, oh, this guy could pull a knife and get me. But, I used to, and a part of me still is concerned, where, you're talking about the militarization of the police and things of this nature, with the MRAPs and armored cars and all of the gear. But I'll tell you, this summer when I'm watching, police officers having bricks and all manner of things thrown at you and attacked and beaten in different metros and things of this nature, the danger of the job and the desire to be safe on the part of the officer, I can understand it all now. Tell us, I mean, have you had some of those situations where, you had mere milliseconds to process what's going on, and what is it like for you in that situation?
Well, you got to understand we're all human, and it's very scary. I mean, I've had bullets fly past my head on 2 different occasions, and another one not right past my head, but near enough. So 3 different occasions, those things have happened, and everybody in my encounter has survived. They were taken into custody. So it's certainly not the movies, and quite honestly, yeah, it's terrifying.
I believe it. You're just looking at that time and the shortness that you have to be able to make a decision. And, when it comes to those situations, how often, if you're being called into a situation, do you sometimes know who the, potential criminal or somebody like that? Do you see, regulars, if you will, that you have to deal with?
Sure. The officers work in the same areas and districts. They get to know people there, and yeah, they have their regulars, no matter what it is, whether it's their auto thieves, their shoplifters, their carjackers. Yeah, they're dealers. Most often the regulars would be, drug dealers. Yeah, they get to know the people in their areas that they're working.
Which is critical for people to understand. We sometimes, it seems that there's this break of, well, that's the police and then everybody else. But it does seem to me that not transparency isn't the right word, but for more cooperation. But if the city leadership isn't making that happen, then that seems to be something that definitely needs to be worked on, of course.
Right.
Now that, circling back a little bit, the demoralizing effect of not having the leadership behind you, I'm looking, as you pointed out, we're now down to the lowest level of officers you've seen in your entire career since 1989. Chicago is having a wave of retirements and people leaving, and I'm sure New York has had the same thing as well. I'm actually kind of worried about the future of policing. What you have to ask yourself, okay, because I look at it and say, okay, if you're driving out folks who are the good guys, but smart enough to realize that nobody has their back, that there's the potential of having their life completely destroyed just with press and lawsuits and things like that. You're not going to be able to attract good talent in the future, and then the bar has to be lowered, and then it gets a lot more dangerous. I mean, you said you're worried about that. What do you see
right
going
on.
forward?
You're right on, Devin. What I'm talking about is when I tested with Minneapolis and St. Paul in '88, there was 800 applicants for 35 positions in each city. Okay. Now we've seen that number reduced to around 200 applicants or so a year ago, and it's much less than that now. You've got to ask yourself, particularly with a good economy, you look back a year ago, pre-COVID, we had a very good economy. There's a lot of other options to go out there and make better money, quite frankly, and do something where danger level isn't there. So who are you going to attract? And when the intense scrutiny that they're under now, constant scrutiny and intense scrutiny that they're under, is there other opportunities out there? And it is driving people away from going into the profession. And the obvious is when you've got to put a class on of 35 people, what does that do with your applicant pool when you only got 50 that show up? They've got to be screened out by backgrounds. You've got to be screened out by physical, by medical, psychological. All these factors come in, and you could be more selective, obviously, when you've got a much larger applicant pool. We don't have that. So it's scary times for law enforcement, and more importantly for the citizenry as we go forth without that ability to draw a lot of good candidates in this. What's going to happen, particularly when you've got to fill when you've got to fill a lot of positions in a short period of time.
Right.
You've got rapid retirements. That's going to leave some big holes. And a year ago, our chief had asked, when we were, free, all of this has happened this summer. A year ago, our chief asked the mayor and city council for 400 more officers over a 5-year phase-in period. And that would have brought our numbers from, roughly 900 to 1,300. And instead, we're going to be under 700. So we've had a swing. We're going a 600, if you will, in the opposite direction of what we should be doing. Because truly, for a city our size, officer per capita ratio type of thing, we were very low across the nation with comparable cities. So we were low to begin with a year ago, and we're really stretched thin now. And what people don't realize when they leave, a lot of the other the units that existed before are eliminated. Our violent criminal apprehension team used to go out and get people that were wanted for robberies, for homicides. They've eliminated that unit now, and they're in patrol to just meet core services and answer 911 calls. So a lot of that doesn't meet the eye. It's a lot of the units that were proactive in things and did investigative follow-ups and stuff are minimized.
So they're just plugging holes essentially as quickly as they appear.
Right.
What do you, when you're actually looking at applicants for the police, at the end of the day, it strikes me that character has to be very high on that list. But what do you look for in a potential police officer, and what do you do, or I would figure you do it through psychological examinations, things like that. But what are the characteristics you're looking for, and how do you try to ferret out people who just would not make a good police officer?
Well, and that's in the administration's hands on what they do. The Federation has no involvement in hiring any longer, so that's their thing. But traditionally, what police departments do, certainly character is the key. My theory has been you find people with good quality character, trustworthy, integrity, honesty. Those are the things that you're looking for. Do an extensive background check on them, psychological. You're looking for people that are getting into this career for the right reasons, and it's truly, the old cliche is to help people, but that's truly what it is. And past life experience is a good predictor of future expectations out of a person. So certainly character is the key. And then you recruit quality people and you train them to police the way you want to, and you follow up. My theory has always been you should have much more people in your background investigative units for the pre-hire people than you do have in your internal affairs units for those that once they're on their problem, it's too late.
Fascinating. As far as this continued challenge of finding officers and filling these holes, what does Minneapolis look like going forward? Are we, are we just going to have to suffer with the high crime and all of the, dangers that are out there, whether it's carjacking, assaults, and gunshots regularly? I mean,
It's interesting. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., the administration is doing a press conference with the Department of Justice. So I don't know what that entails, but I'm interested to see if they're going to roll out some type of partnership or Band-Aid approach until we can do the recruitment, because it takes a year to get somebody on the street. When you start, you take the applications and then you go through your processes, whether it's psychological, physical background, your regular testing to get on. It takes, and then, the academy, and then field training. So it takes a good year. So we're a year behind, and they canceled the academy that was most recently going to start. So we are going to be in dire straits for quite some time here. I don't know if this issue tomorrow, they're going to look for federal assistance or what it is. But yeah, we've got many more retirements on the horizon, and we were short to start with a year ago, and people are leaving, and some are leaving to just completely get out of police work, sadly, and others are leaving to go to other agencies, and others are just taking early out.
Got it. What does, with this deterioration of public life in Minneapolis, I have seen and heard and looked at pictures, all of this, that as well as following scanners and things like that, the allegation that there are now what are being called no-go zones, that there are areas of Minneapolis where the police are at the very least hesitant to go into. Is that the case? Are we looking at, areas of the city that are at this point just overrun?
That's been talked about at the 38th and Chicago area, but the officers are still responding and going in there. Yeah, that's, I think in checking with the officers that work the district, it's not happening. It was rumored, but they're responding everywhere, and you can expect a police response. The question is how quickly, with how short they are on the street.
Got it. And as far as that response time, I mean, what would you like to see for a response time, and what do you foresee going ahead with all of the retirements and shrinking manpower?
Well, dispatch prioritizes calls, and you get it. It's not really my forte on how we break that down, but there is a recommended response time for your priority zeros, which are the top, and then your regular report calls could take an hours if needed. But for regular response, you want to be able to dispatch a car and have them start to it immediately for an emergency in progress. And sometimes they're getting 6-7 minute waits, which is way too long now.
Got it. So how do we fix this going forward? I mean, if you're a resident in Minneapolis or a resident in St. Paul or Chicago, wherever you might be, what is the normal everyday citizen who wants to feel safe on the street? What do they need to do?
I think, well, one, you've got to get involved in the process and encourage the politicians to do the right thing. And they've got a duty for public safety. Elected mayors, elected city council members, elected city government has a duty to provide public safety. And that's a starting point. We've got to have them increase and beef up the department. So get involved and voice your concerns to your city council members and things like that. And, be good eyes and ears for crime going on and report it.
Got it. And what do you see as far as, again, made national news with Black Lives Matter and Thompson and the profanity and the anti-white racism and the threats to burn down Hugo. You know, when you look at that group and, you know, individuals that are going down that road, from your experience, you know, how far are these folks willing to go? How far are they willing to push things? And is it something that you've dealt with before in the past? I mean, this seems to be a very different type of criminality that's meant.
It's nothing we've dealt with to this level in the past. Right now, we're seeing a lot of mob mentality rules, and you know, I'm afraid it's going to lead to citizens arming themselves, and you're going to see more armed confrontations like that for people protecting themselves. You saw when the officers were in court a couple of weeks ago, they were attacked while leaving. They got, you know, they damaged the attorney's vehicles that were representing one or two of the officers. They got in the truck and got out of there, and they just charged people with that. They were caught on camera and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot more brazen intimidation, and I think a lot of it is people are misinformed about the facts on a lot of these situations.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Are you seeing, you know, police officers who are on the street and in, you know, just normal day-to-day life, are they finding this similar vein of distrust and, you know, just sort of malice in their
They're seeing
on their
they're seeing the citizens with highly concerned right now. They are. That's why the officers in the higher crime areas are often told how much they're appreciated, and, you know, don't give up, and don't quit on us and stuff like that. Because the people that are stuck in these neighborhoods, your average citizens, they feel victimized and intimidated, and they don't want to see the police department shrink.
I don't blame them, especially with everything I've been seeing going on. So, well, Bob, what else, if anything, would you, you know, be able to share? And I'm not sure how far you can go, but, you know, looking at the George Floyd situation, you know, again, looking at the body cam video, what has been released, looking at the transcripts, all of that, as well as, of course, the autopsy, it would appear that George Floyd was suffering from an overdose from fentanyl, and hence they couldn't breathe beforehand. But the other part of it too is so much has been said about Derek Chauvin with his knee on, you know, knee on the neck, and that's what has, you know, caused asphyxiation, and that it's murder. Isn't that a part of Minneapolis public police department's training as far as
there was
all the steps they went through? Was that
right.
by book?
When you look at the body camera, they certainly try to de-escalate. They spent a lot of time with Mr. Floyd prior. He was very apprehensive about getting in the vehicle. George Perry, there was a very good documentary done on it that allows people, it's publicized now, to view what they did. I think in the end, it's gonna come down to expert witnesses. It's gonna come down to direct testimony, and you know, it's gonna come down to what a jury thinks on weighing the medical evidence, weighing all of the video footage, and repeatedly. This is going to be a very, very long trial ahead. So, you know, I'm not a predictor or an expert, but it's going to be a very interesting trial.
And if the officers are found not guilty, what do you expect to have happen?
Again, I think because it was ignited so much by our local politicians, I think, you know, we've got to be prepared for that to happen again. We've got to be prepared for large scale civil disobedience, and the department is preparing for that in conjunction with federal partners and things like that. So they'll certainly be geared up with assistance, certainly, because our department's not going to be staffed adequately at all. It's not staffed adequately now. It's certainly not going to be when the trial comes. But they're going to rely heavily on mutual aid, heavily on National Guard. They've got to be prepared for more civil disobedience at this trial. You know, four people charged, and I think if any one of them is whether they're dismissed or found not guilty, it's going to cause for a potential large scale riots again.
Well, that's a shame.
It is. Nobody wins.
No, nobody does. And finally, too, what would you say? A lot of folks are in the suburbs, and you're starting to see crime uptick from that, and then of course people in the suburbs being too scared to drive into Minneapolis, things of that nature. If, as you say, which you're having a shrinking police department who doesn't, who's the leadership of the city and even the state in some ways doesn't seem to have your back whatsoever. Is this contagion? Is it going to spread out of Minneapolis if it's not, tampered down, the crime that's taking place?
Right. I think that's where citizens have to weigh in and let their constituents know how they feel about law enforcement. Let them know that, hey, we're watching. We want our numbers up on our PDs. We don't want to see what's happening in Minneapolis to spread to us. And I think it takes involvement at the community level to save the officers you have. You go out to certain areas and we support the police signs everywhere. They're prominent in the outskirts. So again, it's like anything, be involved in your city government.
Very good. Well, Bob, thank you so much for your service over the decades. The more I watch this, the more I realize just what a tough job that is. During the riots, a group of dads and I went and, protected our church in Minneapolis. And that was the strangest thing. I've never been in war. I've never been to combat, but kissing my wife and my kids goodbye, there was a part of you that, you knew fine, everything should be fine, but there's always that chance that something goes horrifically wrong. How do you do that every day? How does a police officer, look at a wife, look at children, look at a husband, and go out there and do this? How do you do that?
I think it's a calling. That's, again, going back to the beginning of the interview. I think people, it's just in their blood. It's in their calling. It's what they want to do. And you block out the negative like that. You're there to do a job. And it is your calling. A lot of other people have it in other careers, other professions. Got it.
So it's just one of those things. It's my calling and it's part of the territory, and you just sort of compartmentalize your worries.
That's it.
Well, thank you for what you've done, and thanks to all the other police officers out there who are trying to do their best and protect their communities, maintain law and order. We're very grateful for it, and so thank you for the time you've taken with us today to be able to talk about what's happening in Minneapolis, your perspective. Is there anything that you would like to share that I may not have asked about, that you would like to, final thoughts? I
think you did a great job. I appreciate you having me.
No, it's been very good. So, and definitely
Thanks,
stay safe out there. And for everybody listening or watching, I think this is a moment where, if you're worried about the crime, you're worried about destruction taking place, you got to get involved out there. You've got to get out there. You've got to talk to people, and just being a keyboard warrior isn't enough. You got to do more than that. So, well, Bob, thank you so much for your time. We're very grateful for it. And thank you all to our viewers. This has been a countdown to the election by First Tuesday Conservatives. And I am CEO of the Charlemagne Institute, which is co-hosting this event with Alpha News. Charlemagne Institute is publisher of Intellectual Takeout and Chronicles magazine. You can join us. For membership, just visit charlemagneinstitute.org and you'll get a 12-month subscription to Chronicles. Tomorrow we'll be back in, so look for the emails coming out as far as our lineup for tomorrow, and then all the way up to the election. Thank you so much. And again, Bob, and to the police out there, thank you for your service, and pray for your safety. Thank you.